Fearless is Taylor Swift's sophomore album, but you would not be remiss for mistaking it to be her first, because it was the first to really break through to the wider public consciousness and help Taylor enter the world stage. I mean, the second we heard those first lines of Love Story being transported to a reimagining of a Shakespearean classic, we knew this was something special. We have people proposing to the song, even to this day. And although parts of this era could have been overshadowed by certain controversies, this album in time clearly still holds a special fairy tale place in Taylor's heart, because years later, mirroring in a sense the way it was many of our first times hearing her songs, it was also the album with which she introduced us to the reclaimed versions of her catalog, effectively starting the Taylor's Version project. Hi, my name is Vera, and with 10 days remaining until Taylor Swift's 12th studio album, The Life of a Showgirl, comes out, I thought it'd be nice to combine my love for literature and my love for Taylor Swift's art and recommend you some books based on each album to help with the wait and anticipation over these next couple of days. Today, we are continuing the countdown with Fearless. For these recommendations, I really tried to dig deep and extract certain themes and motifs that I thought made the albums resonate so deeply, and to tailor my recommendations based on that. The first idea that I really find is interesting in the context of Taylor's catalog, but also to Fearless, the album, was how Taylor ventures out beyond the strict country sound that she had in debut to a more country pop sound. And you can tell this right from the very first twang on the guitar on the titular song, which is also the album opener, Fearless. Although yes, it is still a guitar opening, it's just not really a sound that I think you would be able to find on a record like Debut. We are more upbeat, more poppy, more shimmering. I don't really know if that's a good way to term it, but you just know something is different. There's just something about the way it sounds. And this coming to, in terms of sounds, was very much mirrored in the contents of the album as well. Though, again, like I said, country pop, it's not like she's totally disregarding the country motifs. And continuing on with this idea of this coming to that is experienced throughout the record, when talking about why she decided to re-record Fearless first for her Taylor's Version project, Taylor says, "Deciding on what album to re-record first was pretty easy for me. I always gravitated towards Fearless because I think that, as an album, it was a real coming of age. And I look back on that album and it fills me with such pride, and it was an album about hope and lessons learned and the effervescence of teenage youth and all that." Again, let's highlight that she says as an album, it was a real coming of age. The album itself is representative of the coming of age. It's not just that she happens to sing about experiences coming of age, though she definitely does. For example, on 15, she is talking to a younger version of herself who is just starting high school and reassuring her that things will be okay if she can just count to 10, take it in, and this is life, before she knows who she's gonna be. And the best book, in my opinion, that really represents what it means to come of age, to come to, in a sense, but also the transitions that come with this growing up, is one of my favorite books of all time, called All the Pretty Horses by Cormac McCarthy. Yes, this is the first book in the famous Border trilogy, followed on by The Crossing and Cities of the Plain, but you can read it as a standalone. It works perfectly fine as a standalone, and I highly encourage you to do so. Another disclaimer that I'd like to say is, do not worry about being a little bit confused about what's going on. Cormac McCarthy is very famous for his lack of punctuation and his slightly confusing grammar, even in terms of like run-on sentences and endless descriptions of environments. But do not worry, the structure in this book is very quite simple but effective. I'll get onto that a little bit later. But it's structured into these 4 chapters that fit in quite well with the idea of the hero's journey, and every single chapter has its own mini arc or mini theme that it really focuses on. So if you ever feel lost, you can always just reorient yourself quite well based on which chapter you are in, and there's only 4 of them. We follow John Grady Cole, a 16-year-old boy in Texas right after World War II. His family's ranch, unfortunately, is basically falling apart after the death of his grandfather, and his way of life, the whole cowboy, open range lifestyle, is unfortunately dying out as industry progresses. Instead of sticking around, he decides to ride down to the Texas-Mexico border with his best friend Rollins to find work as a cowboy and continue living this lifestyle that has meant so much to him. Along the way, the two of them meet Blevins, this younger troublemaking kid who drags them into some pretty dangerous situations. And in Mexico, John Grady falls in love with the ranch owner's daughter, Alejandra. But of course, this is a relationship that is complicated because of family and class expectations. You could say that this is a place where civil blood makes civil hands unclean, referencing back to the prologue of Romeo and Juliet. I'm sorry, I had to do it given the album. But yes, this is quite a harrowing book. There's violence, prison, betrayal, discussion about the role of women in society, justice systems, what justice is life fair? Like what makes us grow up? It's really rough, but it's an incredible adventure, and maybe adventure is the wrong word. It's more so a journey. This book is a journey, and it's the journey that every one of us has to go through, the journey of growing up, of coming to. Yes, this book is a Western. Yes, it deals with idealism and harsh reality, the end of the Old West, the way that ways of life disappear, but it isn't a Western in the gunslingers and saloon sense. It is more of a coming of age story set in a fading cowboy world. Just like Fearless is not really a straightforward country album, All the Pretty Horses, like I said, is not really a straightforward Western. Fearless is about emotional and romantic firsts, the first love, the first heartbreak, the first time you realize the world can actually hurt you. However, All the Pretty Horses is about existential first. The first confrontation with death, the first injustice, first fragility of dreams. But it is important to note there is a little bit of both of those in the album and in All the Pretty Horses, just weighed obviously differently. They capture the exact moment in life when you're no longer a child, but not yet fully a grown adult, standing in the space between who you were and who you're gonna be. At 15. Since we already mentioned Shakespeare, then I kind of want to build on that for the second recommendation. Taylor loves to rewrite a Shakespeare story, a Shakespeare character, a Shakespeare scene. In Debut, in Cold As You, at the end of the chorus, she says, "And now that I'm sitting here thinking it through, I've never been anywhere cold as you." And this is obviously a reference to Sonnet 18 by William Shakespeare, which begins with, "Shall I compare thee to a summer day?" Instead of comparing the lover to a summer day, she is now comparing him to a cold one, a cold place, an uninviting place. And although that is quite basic, again, Debut, Taylor is, 16 and younger when she was writing the songs. On Fearless, she takes that to a whole nother level with Love Story, which, as we all know, Romeo, take me somewhere we can be alone. I'll be waiting. All we've got to do is run. It's a Romeo and Juliet retelling. And more specifically, I always like to think about it as being set in an alternate universe sort of version of the Act 2, Scene 2 in Romeo and Juliet, the play, because the story starts with her closing her eyes and flashing back to when she was on a balcony in summer air. Just like Juliet in that scene is in a balcony calling out, "Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo?" Here specifically, this alternate story that we end up with is one where things worked out for Romeo and Juliet. After all, she is reminiscing at the start. "We were both young when I first saw you." She is telling us the love story from a vantage point where it all worked out. And she is telling us a happy memory that contrasts with the tragedy that the play ultimately becomes. But sometimes imprinting on art, music, literature can go too far. And a book that plays with that concept a lot is If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. This is a dark academia murder mystery novel which was really popular a couple of years back. And it is a story that is set at an elite arts conservatory, and it follows a group of 7 acting students who, just like Taylor Swift, are obsessed with Shakespeare. More specifically though, these 7 students are quite the characters. They have very messy and complicated relationships with each other, but our main character is Oliver, and just like Taylor Swift reminisces in Love Story, he is also telling us a story that happened 10 years earlier, because now, as we enter the narrative, he is leaving prison. So you know right from the start that someone has died and Oliver went to jail for it, but you do not know the full truth. A parallel that I find very interesting is that just like Taylor puts herself into the roles of Juliet and her lover into Romeo, the different friends in this friend group also have strict roles that they play even in real life. You have James, the star, who is always cast as the hero, Richard, who is intense and aggressive, often the villain, Meredith, beautiful, seductive, the love interest, Oliver, the one who we are learning the story from, is more of a side character in both life and in the plays. As their senior year goes on, tensions rise and boil over. There's jealousy, resentment, love triangles, power struggles, all surrounding Macbeth and then later Julius Caesar, with there sort of starting to be this tension between what is real and what is actually acting. Then something happens during a production and one of them ends up dead. The big questions that we are left with are, was it an accident or a murder? Who is really to blame? And why did Oliver take the fall? The character's life starts to feel like one of the tragedies that they are so used to performing on stage. If you like The Secret History, this has similar energy, but instead of focusing on classics and classical Greek specifically, here the focus is theater. And it is more accessible, much more accessible. If you let me go a little bit deeper into the analysis, by the time the death in the book occurs, it feels almost predestined. Like they've been acting out Shakespeare's tragedy so intensely that they've manifested it in real life. And it's not just that the fact that this person dies, it's the fact that the group collectively believes in the story so much that they unconsciously bringing it to life. They no longer perform the tragedy, they are living one. And this creates a fascinating contrast with Taylor, because Taylor's art is the safe play. She steps into Shakespeare's world, borrows whatever she needs, takes the imagery, takes the character, but then is able to step back out with a song that is wholly hers. A song that transforms a tragedy into a happy exercise in reminiscence. But the students in If We Were Villains don't step back. They are trapped inside of the text, consumed by those archetypes that they play. What begins as an admiration for Shakespeare ends up as a total loss of self. And I do think that this is quite a good cautionary tale, perhaps, for some Swifties that maybe read into Taylor's personal life too much, or people that just really imprint on her, thinking that they know her as a person, when, to be honest, like, we only know Taylor the character, Taylor the speaker in the song, and I do not think that actual Taylor Swift is the same person as the Taylor that is telling us the songs. So to sum up, Taylor's Juliet sings her way to freedom, but M.L. Rio's cast of characters are forever trapped on a stage, and I just love this way that both works play with the potential benefits and risks of art and living it too intensely, perhaps. But of course, Shakespeare's plays aren't the only theme or motif really that spans the Fearless album. One of the most important motifs, I'd argue, is this idea of the fairy tale. Taylor Swift in her beautiful ball gown is our fairy tale princess. But of course, not everything art is a fairy tale. Like I mentioned before, coming of age, facing reality, huge idea here. Love story, she takes a Shakespeare play and makes it her own. She does the same thing with fairy tales. She has to face reality and that life is not a fairy tale. And that is a big part of the growing up. Oh, just like that, fairy tales and their undermining are an important theme throughout the album. On one hand, she leans into the fairy tale of dancing in the storm in her best dressed Fearless, or the girl wearing sneakers on the bleachers who the jock notices instead of the cheerleader. But then again, we have songs like White Horse, where ultimately she ends up singing, I'm not a princess, this ain't a fairy tale, I'm not the one you'll sweep off her feet to lead her down a stairwell, this ain't Hollywood, this is a small town, I was a dreamer before you came and let me down. Now it's too late for you and your white horse to come around. Of course, referencing this idea of the knight in shining armor saving the princess on his white horse. In life in general, I find that there is this contrast between the fairy tale of what is supposed to happen in your high school experience and then the reality of it, which often is quite different for a lot of different people. Taylor really likes to interweave the fairy tale and the reality on this album, not only on White Horse, but also one of my favorite songs of all time, The Way I Loved You, where she interweaves the fairy tale of this passionate, burning red relationship and the reality that that is actually really not that good for you, but at the same time yearning for it because what she has, which should be the fairy tale, a very steady, happy relationship, just isn't leaving her satisfied. And a book that I find does a good job of interweaving the magical, the fairy tale with a slightly different, colder reality is Bunny by Mona Awad. So on a superficial note, the setting, quite apt because it's a university setting, and I just really think that this album deals a lot with, that romanticization of academia. Bunny is a dark, very, very weird, satirical novel about grad school cliques and identity. But did I mention it's weird? I really think I need to highlight that. We follow our main character, Samantha Heather Mackey, a grad student at this really exclusive MFA program for creative writing. And she is a total outsider in her group. She pretty much hates all the other girls in her program that form this very tight-knit clique where they all stick together, are obsessed with each other, and they call each other Bunny all day. All you can hear is, hi, Bunny. How are you, Bunny? Thanks, Bunny. You're doing great, Bunny. They're very sweet on the surface, but it comes across quite cult-like. Samantha judges them hard, hanging out with her only friend called Ava, who keeps her grounded. That is until the bunnies invite Samantha to their private workshop. And reluctantly, she goes. Now, bear with me. This is where the book gets weird. I don't really want to spoil it because I think that you should go into this and experience it for yourself. But let's just say the workshop is not about writing. What we end up with is a mix of art, violence, obsession, and as Samantha gets pulled deeper into this bunny world, she really starts to lose her grip on reality, to say the least. This line between her writing, her fantasies, and the harsh reality starts to blur for her. Just like the line between those two, the fairy tale and the reality, the blurring between that line is such a big idea on Fearless. I would say that in Bunny, it is much more sinister than it is on Fearless, but I think that's kind of the vibe that I'm going for with these recommendations. What if Fearless was actually quite sinister? Even though this personally is not one of my favorite books, a lot of people really, really love it, and I think that the highlight for a lot of those people that love this book is this understanding of feelings through the fairy tale lens. Now, the last aspect of Fearless that I'd like to talk about today is the reflective aspect of it, the advice aspect of it, and which I think is found on this album more so than any others. What do I mean by this? Well, on 15, she is reflecting on her younger self. She is almost writing a letter to her younger self, telling her things will be okay. On the best day, she, is reflecting on the relationship that she has with her mother going through time, similar to how she does so in Mary's song on debut. But it is also a reflection on her overall childhood and how it looked like up until this point through that lens of writing a love letter to her mother. And Change is perhaps the most prophetic one because it's written from this future perspective to herself of when she already accomplished a great success. And this album, ironically, and happy for her, was that huge success that led to things changing. So the book that I'd like to recommend with this idea of these letters of advice, this reflective nature, is Letters to a Young Poet by Rainer Maria Rilke. This is a nonfiction collection of actual letters written by the poet. The book comes from a real correspondence between Rilke and a young man called Franz Capus, who was an aspiring poet. In a quite bizarre turn of events, Capus went to the same military academy, I believe, as Rilke, and they shared a professor who noticed that he was reading a Rilke novel or Rilke poetry and said, "Oh, I know him. I taught him, like, do you want to get in contact with him?" And so Capus says, yes, of course. He sends a letter off to Rilke, and Rilke decided to respond. And these letters are all about advice on poetry, yes, but also about life, musings, Rilke's musings on the nature of life, collected over several years. There are 10 letters in total, some shorter, some longer. Highly recommend. You can read one a day. And they're all about things like creativity and art, solitude, why it's necessary for self-discovery and for artistic growth. It's about the patience and depth that comes with it when approaching love and relationships, but also about personal growth and learning to sit with this uncertainty instead of rushing for answers. One of my favorite quotes from this book is this idea that you have to live the question. I think we all know that Taylor Swift really, really loves to live the questions as well. So I really think that if you resonate with Fearless and you want to get a book that perhaps gives you similar guidance that you might experience from this album, but in a more philosophical approach and, you know, from a different perspective, I really, really highly recommend Letters to a Young Poet. It is one of the most influential books that I've ever read in my life. It is gentle and timeless advice, especially for artists or just anyone figuring out their place in this world. You don't have to agree with all of the lessons. I definitely don't agree with everything that Rilke says, but I think his way of viewing the world is really fascinating and beautiful, and I think that that has a lot of power in and of itself. I also wonder if this is a book that maybe Taylor Swift would be interested in reading, so Taylor, if you're interested, I think you might really like this one. Anyway, those were my 4 recommendations based on Fearless, the album. If you read these books, you know the drill. Let me know in the comments. And if you have any other books that you'd like to recommend based on Fearless, also do let me know. Anyways, that's all from me. I'll see you tomorrow for a discussion on my favorite, or maybe second favorite, it depends on the day, Taylor Swift album called Speak Now. Bye-bye!